Nouri al-Maliki rejects the appointment of Haider al-Abadi as Iraq's Prime Minister, calling the move unconstitutional. The plight of the Yazidi community worsens, with tens of thousands still besieged by Islamic State militants. And a cautious calm prevails in Gaza as the Israelis and Palestinians continue negotiating over a permanent ceasefire. Hello there, you're watching Ali Tijah World News and I'm Fatima Basim. Iraq's recently appointed president selected First Deputy Speaker of Parliament Haider al-Abadi for the post of Prime Minister, tasking him with the formation of a long-delayed government. And although the move has been welcomed by some Western governments, including the US, Nouri al-Maliki's Dawa party rejected the appointment, calling it a constitutional coup.
The battle for Iraq is heating up, and it's not just the fight between the Iraqi military and militants, which is claiming casualties. Heads are rolling on the political front.
The foreign coordination was revealed when we rejected the constitutional breach. What did the U.S. administration say? What did the U.S. State Department say? It supported those who violated the Constitution and did not condemn it, even though it is a democratic country.
Dubbed by the incumbent Nouri al-Maliki as a constitutional coup, Iraq's newly appointed President Fuad Masum selected First Deputy Speaker of Parliament Haider al-Abadi as nominee for the post of Prime Minister, tasking him with the much-delayed formation of a new government. Following al-Abadi's appointment, the US, UK and the UN welcomed the nomination. US Vice President Joe Biden hailed it as a key milestone while offering US help in fighting IS militants.
We believe that the government formation process is critical in terms of sustaining the stability and calm in Iraq. And our hope is that Mr. Maliki will not stir those waters.
Meanwhile, the UN warned security forces from actions that may be seen as interference in matters related to the democratic transfer of political authority.
The Secretary General is concerned that heightened political tensions, coupled with the current security threat of Islamic State, could lead the country into a even deeper crisis. He strongly urges all political parties and their supporters to remain calm and respect the political process governed by the Constitution. The people of Iraq deserve to live in a safe, prosperous, and stable country, one that all groups in Iraq, including religious and ethnic minorities, can meaningfully contribute to and feel as their own.
The leaders of France and Turkey, for their part, called on the newly nominated premier to quickly form a government of national unity in the face of IS threats. But not everyone was happy. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's Dawa party rejected the nomination, stating that Abadi represents himself while pledging allegiance to Maliki. Maliki was also quick to file a complaint against the president. The country's federal court issued an early morning statement replying to the president of Iraq, in which it simply reiterated an earlier ruling on how the nominee for the post of prime minister should be selected. It, however, provided no evidence that it had even received Maliki's complaint, let alone ruled that the State of Law coalition was the largest parliamentary bloc and therefore entitled to nominate a prime minister.
Let's get our Iraq correspondent on the phone. Mustafa, what's going to happen now, given that the Dawa party did not recognize Haider al-Abadi's appointment as premier?
Yes, actually, there's dissimilar stances and several statements made by the components of Dawa party and also the National Alliance. Some of them actually are supporting Dr. Abadi and his bid to form the next government, and actually they said he will be a very good choice to Iraq in the next stage. The others actually they said we will not say that. We will not let down our right to form the government. Of course, members of the State of Law coalition, they said Maliki is the legitimate one who will be able and has the only right and the sole right to form the next government. So some of them actually are opponents to Mr. Abadi. Others actually are pro-Maliki, and they want Mr. Maliki. And they said Mr. Maliki is the only one who has the right to form the government.
All
Mr.
right.
Abadi actually made his first statement. Yes, Fatma.
Yes, all right, Mustafa, thank you for giving us the updates from Baghdad. Now, let's go to London and bring in political analyst Hani Ali to discuss further on this situation. Now, Hani, was this a constitutional coup? Because according to Nouri al-Maliki, a nominee was chosen without the consent of the Dawa party.
Well, these are very dangerously critical times for Iraq, to be realistic. The National Alliance, Maliki committed three fatal mistakes so far. The first and foremost was that he ignored completely the recommendations and continuous advice from Ayatollah Sistani, potentially the most influential figure in Iraq and also the top leader of the Shia in Iraq. Which holds a very strong weight on the street with the Shia population and with all Iraqis who listen to him. The second mistake, fatal mistake that Maliki did was to go ahead and divide the Shia bloc and persist on dividing that despite other communities. At the end of the day, they reconciled their differences and managed to come up with one candidate. He continued to persist and insist and really leave very little room for any negotiation or discussions through his adamant decision to go ahead with his candidacy. And the third fatal mistake that he committed was last night when he declared that he is going to potentially unravel this very fragile structure that has been put together, which is to take Fuad Ma'soom, the newly elected president of Iraq, to court. And literally what he was saying is pushing him over to the point where he would either resign or the whole structure would fall apart. So these are three fatal mistakes by Maliki, which left no room for other people but to go ahead and at the end of the day, choose someone who is from the state of law. Yes, state of law holds 95 seats, but with the latest sort of developments of people leaving state of law because of these potentially fatal mistakes by Maliki, it is no longer the longest or the largest bloc in the parliament.
All right, I want to bring in Yuram Abdullah Wela into the discussion. He's a columnist at the Tehran Times and joins us from the US. Yuram, it seems that Maliki has lost the international support, doesn't it?
It certainly does. One has to be a little bit suspicious about U.S. involvement in this situation. I think that the previous speaker brought up some very valid points that have to be considered. At the same time, we have to look at what's happening in Gaza, and we see another case where there was a democratic process going on that was not suitable to the United States. So whether that's going on here or not, we'll have to see. But it does appear that it may be the case that this is another situation where the United States is trying to intervene, and of course the Western allies are falling in line. It does appear that current Prime Minister al-Maliki has a valid point with regard to the Constitution. I'm not sure exactly at what point in time your previous speaker was referring to that the Da'wah party would not have a majority. It would appear that at this particular point they still do, and therefore would be entitled to make that choice as far as the next prime minister. In any event, it would appear that behind this is some sort of broader plan on the part of the United States, which includes some sort of a containment operation of Daesh, which they're translating as either Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant or Islamic State of Iraq in Syria, which appears to possibly have gotten out of hand in terms of its objectives. At the same time, I've written many years ago that one of the techniques of the United States as far as maintaining hegemony is to maintain a level of conflict. That is to say, if they cannot institute a dictator who is subservient to their needs. That is to say, maintain a certain level of conflict and chaos. If that doesn't achieve the objectives, turn it up a little bit. So it may be that this is what we're seeing here. On one hand, it seems rather clear that the United States has at least covertly supported the efforts of Daesh by allowing them to capture substantial military assets. And at the same time, the United States has to put on a front of being against, quote, terrorism, unquote, by their airstrikes on the very same troops that they seem to be supporting.
All right, Hani, I'd like to take it back to you. Now, Abadi is viewed as close to al-Maliki. What went wrong? Do you think that the US is behind this rift?
Well, the position of the US is very, very disappointing. They've been lazy, they've been completely negative so far, and they have failed really to come up with anything that could be considered constructive towards Iraq. So I agree with your respected speaker in there. But the point that I mentioned is the first session of the parliament, when it was held, and by coincidence, Haidar al-Abadi was elected as deputy speaker for parliament. It was through a nomination of the so-called National Alliance, which included State of Law and included the other Shia factions who constituted the National Alliance. So that was very clear decision at the point that there was a National Alliance. The other point is that, well, what was the discussions about so far? If the State of Law already had their candidate, they might as well should have gone to the parliament and decided to go ahead with the third term of Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki. The discussions were that they wanted to come up with a unified candidate from the National Alliance, which includes State of Law, Maliki State of Law, and Sayyid Ammar Hakim's Majlis, and Sayyid Muqtada Sadr, and Ibrahim Ja'fari, and Fadila, and others. So the point here is, there was a National Alliance that everybody agreed, and in fact, actually, if we take it further, before the elections, all these different parties, Shia parties, have signed a memorandum of understanding that they would hold the National Alliance and continue to keep the National Alliance as an important institution in Iraqi politics. This is before the elections, and then during the elections, and after the elections in the first session of the parliament. It all confirmed and reiterated and verified the fact that there is something called the National Alliance, which had about 170 seats in parliament. Out of those 170 seats, so far we know from the results that 127 chosen Haidar al-Abadi. So Maliki, unfortunately, no longer becomes the one who holds the majority, because the National Alliance, the recognized Constitution of National Alliance or Institution of National Alliance, have chosen to select somebody else, Haidar al-Abadi. Whether we agree with that or not, at the end of the day, this is the democratic process. Yes, America, I'm still, and everybody should be suspicious of American interference or other regional players' interference. But at the end of the day, this is unfortunately the case that Maliki has lost friends quicker than the stock exchange lost money during the credit crunch. He continued to lose friends right, left, and center. And that made him to be in a position that is very difficult for anyone to stand by him. And like I said, Ayatollah Sistani, the most influential figure in Iraq, who is respected by all Iraqis, regardless of their sect or religion, repeatedly said that people should not grip on power, that people should not, any politician must not become an obstacle towards forming a government, that any politician with the least responsibility towards the country would not cling on power in a clear reference to Maliki. And yet he decided to ignore that. And one other point, which is very important, if you see the conference that Maliki held, all the people who are standing next to him or behind him pretty much lacked the first line leadership of Da'wah party. Where is Al-Adib? Where is Kamal Sa'idi? Where is Al-Bayati, Abbas Al-Bayati? Those who are generally at the forefront of the Da'wah party. Now there are very key figures in the Da'wah party as well, who not only supported Haidar al-Abadi, but decided that Maliki is no longer a viable option.
All right, I'd like to stop you there. Let's go back to Yoram on this. Yoram, had Maliki been chosen to form a new government, would the political arena remain paralyzed in Iraq?
It's very difficult to say, at least from my perspective, because again, I'm viewing the situation from a more global perspective than your other extremely knowledgeable guest. It would appear that what the United States is doing is instituting levels of violence in various locations, either directly or through proxies. And at this particular point, certainly, while what your other guest says may be true, nonetheless, from the standpoint of international relations, it's clear that al-Maliki wound up being a little bit too closely allied to Iran for Washington's desires. So this is one thing that makes me suspicious that Washington is greatly involved. As far as the popular support, again, from the data I've seen, it appears that Prime Minister Maliki still enjoys a plurality of support from Iraqis. So it would appear to me that once again, the United States is acting in its own best interests here, and that is to put pressure on two other countries, namely Iran and Syria, which it still perceives as being threats to its own interest in the Persian Gulf and its energy resources. So as far as what locally happens in Iraq, unfortunately, I think the truth of the matter is Washington is relatively unconcerned, as can be seen by the statements by President Obama regarding any possible redeployment of troops there. You'll probably get something like a few airstrikes, and that's probably going to be it. And of course, again, there's precedence for that, as we saw with the bombing of the drug factory in Sudan during the Clinton administration, which really had nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism and had everything to do with political cover for Clinton. I think the same thing is occurring here with these airstrikes as far as Obama is concerned, that it's more to do with his lack of popularity in the United States at this point. And unfortunately, once again, who is suffering from this? It's the Iraqi people.
Another influential player in Iraq, Iran, hasn't commented on the situation so far. Why do you think that is, Yoram?
That there has not been much commentary on the situation in Iraq, or
that it hasn't welcomed or rejected the announcement of Haider Abadi's premiership.
Well, I think at this particular point, there is much going on in Iran and politics. If you look at President Rouhani's speech last night, it seemed that there was a great deal of concern with respect to the current negotiations with the United States, and of course the P5+1, but let's face it, this is essentially the United States, since the European Union doesn't have an independent foreign policy. So what you have is a situation where, and again, I should preface this by saying this is my personal opinion. I'm not speaking and voicing this opinion in terms of being a representative for Tehran Times here, but I got the sense from listening to President Rouhani's speech that he was saying, look, all of you diplomats had better prepare for the eventuality that perhaps these negotiations with Washington are not going to succeed, and that Iran has to concentrate on its resistance economy. So it may very well be that Iran is very concerned right at the moment with the economic situation there, as well as trying to come up with some plan to be able to put the brakes on the Israeli entity as far as what's going on in Gaza. And in the process, in due time, they will get around to making a statement with regard to the internal affairs of Iraq. It is the policy, of course, of Iran not to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, other sovereign nations, quite unlike the Washington regime.
All right, Yoram Abdullah Walia, a columnist at the Tehran Times, thank you for speaking to Ali Tijah. I'd also like to thank political analyst Hani Ali from London. As the so-called Islamic State militants continue to wreak havoc in northern Iraq, Yazidis from the Mount Sinjar region, one of the minority groups in Iraq, have been forced across the border into Syria to escape the deadly violence in the crisis-ridden country.
Displaced families from Iraq's minority Yazidi sect have been forced to cross the border into Syria to escape the ongoing violence in the town of Sinjar. Thousands were brought in trucks to the border after the militant siege of Sinjar was broken by Kurdish forces.
They used RPG rockets, mortars and BKC weapons. We didn't have enough ammunition, so we were forced to flee to the mountain. Children died, the elderly died. They took the girls and the women.
Currently, 400,000 Yazidis are displaced. They are from Sinjar, from Sheikh Khan, from Bishaka and Al-Kush. There are currently 80,000 people besieged on Sinjar mountain, and their situation is critical. They have no food or water.
During Monday's offensive, Kurdish forces made gains on some fronts while losing ground on others. The strategically important town of Jalala was overtaken by IS militants after Kurdish Peshmerga troops lost control of the city. This comes following a campaign of airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of the militants by the U.S. The United States struck 5 targets that included mortar positions and armed vehicles, which resulted in the death of 61 IS militants.
Britain has ruled out any combat role in Iraq at the present time. Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond said that the UK will instead concentrate its efforts on delivering humanitarian aid to people fleeing Islamic State militants.
Well, we don't envisage a combat role at the present time. We are talking at the moment about a humanitarian operation and using our assets to gain more awareness of what's going on this mountain. Where people are, how we can get supplies into them, and how we can help to get them out. There is a potential humanitarian disaster here on a huge scale, and it behoves us and anyone else with the ability and the capability to look at what we can do to provide all the humanitarian support and to try to find a way to get these people out to safety.
Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott said that militants from the so-called Islamic State pose a danger to people beyond the Middle East. The comments come after a picture of an Australian youth holding a decapitated head circulated online. The shocking image was posted on the Twitter account of Khalid Sharrouf, an Australian man who fled to Syria last year before joining the IS. Meanwhile, the Syrian army has been making gains in the Damascus suburbs, securing more ground in its fight against militants in the area.
The Syrian National Army has been fighting bitter battles with militant groups in the Damascus suburb of Mliha in recent days. And now it seems that the push to retake the areas east of the capital is finally bearing fruit. This video released by the political administration of the Syrian army shows soldiers shooting at targets and firing tank shells at insurgent positions, as officers confirmed that Syrian troops are making gains.
We regained control of the building and the situation is now safe.
Militant groups have been trying to break through the army's lines for some time, threatening Damascus's main square of Abbasiyeh. Syria's air defense forces have a large base in Mliha and are responsible for providing the ground forces with air cover. In May, Syria's air defense chief was killed during an operation against militants in Mliha, further highlighting the strategic importance of the area and the urgency in liberating it from foreign-backed militant groups.
Syria's Minister of Tourism appealed to the international community to help protect the country's ancient sites, which are being targeted by terrorist groups.
We have seen through videos how they are targeting those buildings. Now they are saying they are preparing to target Aleppo Citadel. If Aleppo Citadel is targeted, then this is truly the crime of an era. We're reaching out to concerned international organizations so the world can face up to its responsibilities to stop support for these terrorists.
You're watching Al Ittijah World News, still to come. Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan vows to maintain his grip on power after winning the country's presidential elections. Welcome back to Ali Tijah World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Noor al-Maliki rejects the appointment of Haider al-Abadi as Iraq's Prime Minister, calling the move unconstitutional. The plight of the Yazidi community worsens, with tens of thousands still besieged by Islamic State militants. And a cautious calm prevails in Gaza as the Israelis and Palestinians continue negotiating over a permanent ceasefire. A 72-hour ceasefire has taken hold in the Gaza Strip as Israeli and Palestinian negotiators headed to the Egyptian capital for indirect talks. The negotiations, mediated by Egypt, are aimed at ending the deadly month-long Israeli offensive in the Gaza Strip.
A cautious calm returned over the skies of Gaza as a 72-hour truce took effect just after midnight local time. The lull in fighting is the result of days of Egyptian-brokered mediation aimed at ending more than 4 weeks of Israeli aggression against Palestinians in the besieged coastal enclave, which has so far killed a staggering 1,939 people and injured nearly 10,000 others. As the sun rose over Gaza City, residents began inspecting the damage caused by the relentless Israeli aggression, which in many cases has wiped out entire homes, businesses and neighborhoods.
This is a chicken farm and this is a house. This is my land and I live off it. I have no other source of income beside it. I support 11 people and I have invested all my life savings in this.
If a stone in a church were to be destroyed, the whole world would flip upside down. But mosques in the Gaza Strip, and there are many, more than 300 mosques, have been destroyed. They were destroyed because they are fighting Islam.
Egypt urged the warring sides to use the 3-day lull to reach a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire agreement after efforts to extend a similar truce last week collapsed into a firestorm of violence. Meanwhile, an Israeli delegation has arrived in Cairo to resume Egyptian-mediated talks it had abandoned last week. Earlier, in between ceasefires, Israeli warplanes struck more than 170 targets, killing at least 19 Palestinians. The Palestinian resistance group Hamas conditioned that a permanent agreement can only be reached if the Israelis lift the 8-year blockade on the Gaza Strip. A senior UN aid official warned the Israelis that a new conflict in Gaza is likely unless the Jewish state lifts a crippling blockade on the tiny Palestinian enclave. This as the UN announced that the 3/4 of those killed in Gaza so far were civilians, with nearly a third of the civilian victims being children, which has only supported Palestinian claims that the month-long brutal Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip amounts to war crimes.
A Turkish aid group said it would send a new flotilla of ships to break the Israeli siege of Gaza 4 years after the deadly storming of another Turkish vessel by Israeli commandos. The Humanitarian Relief Foundation, or IHH, which organised the first flotilla, said in a statement that it did decide to send the ships in light of the latest Israeli aggression on Gaza. Meanwhile, other humanitarian groups announced that they had successfully created an air corridor to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza.
As of this morning, we have established an air corridor regarding the tragedy we are witnessing in Gaza. This is the second leg of this corridor that began this morning, as we have also flown in the wounded.
Meanwhile, a Palestinian man was shot dead by Israeli troops during a raid in the northern West Bank. A funeral procession was held earlier for the 24-year-old who was killed in a shootout with occupation forces in Ghabalan village south of Nablus. Israeli soldiers had surrounded the house where Akra was staying with his brother before moving in with lethal force. Iranian President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani has slammed the Zionist regime's military attacks on Palestinians in Gaza, saying that Tel Aviv has been defeated. Sheikh Rouhani said that Tel Aviv has suffered a humiliating defeat in the besieged Palestinian territory. Nevertheless, Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people were so atrocious that even some of its supporters fell short of backing the regime. Well, hundreds of Iranians held a demonstration in front of the United Nations complex in the capital Tehran, condemning international silence over the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip. Our correspondent Hussein Dabash has that story.
In a sign of solidarity with the people of the besieged Gaza Strip, hundreds of Iranians have held a rally in front of the United Nations complex here in the Iranian capital, Tehran. Government employees, students, and even movie stars showed up to show their support for the Palestinian people. They are urging the world body to take more action to stop the Israeli entity's continued attacks on the besieged Gaza Strip. This is the second pro-Palestine rally in front of the United Nations complex in the Islamic Republic in less than a month. One question, however, remains. Do Iranians believe the UN is listening to their demands?
I don't know. This is very hard to see. People are dying and children are dying. This is not just for cinema. This is for people. I don't know what they are thinking, but we are here because doing something for the children in Gaza.
Students raised the flag of Palestine while government employees and movie stars held placards showing the Israeli entity's destruction of Gaza. The demonstrators in a final statement deplored the silence of the governments of regional countries on the crisis in the besieged coastal enclave.
We are here to call on the governments of regional countries to put their differences aside and fight the ultimate battle against Israel. If we do not stop Israel now, the Palestinian people will be extinct. Then what? Do they think Israel will stop? No, we are all next.
Ever since the Israeli entity began its current aggression on the Palestinian people in Gaza last month, such protests have been the scene across Iran on an almost daily basis. The purpose of today's demonstration, according to organizers, is to pressure the international community to put a halt to the ongoing Israeli attacks on the besieged Gaza Strip. These demonstrators want a permanent solution that would permanently halt and stop the Israeli entity's decades-old aggression on the Palestinian people. Reporting for Al-Ittijah TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
Egypt has barred the head of Human Rights Watch from entering the country just before a report is due to be published implicating Cairo in a mass killing of protesters. The executive director of the New York-based NGO was held overnight in Cairo airport before being denied entry. The rights activist had flown to Egypt for the release of the report, marking a year since the mass killing of an estimated 700 opposition protesters. Turkey's President-elect Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called for the beginning of a new era in the country after he won the first direct presidential elections. Erdogan vowed to maintain his grip on power, albeit from the ceremonial post of president.
From the balcony of his Justice and Development Party headquarters in Ankara, Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan celebrated in front of a massive cheering crowd. Erdogan and his AK party are familiar with election victories. They have been in power for over a decade. But this is a personal fate. Erdogan is now the new president of Turkey.
Today we are closing an era and taking the first step for a new era. Brothers, I say this from the heart. Let's start a new social reconciliation period today, and let's leave the old discussions in the old Turkey. Let's leave tensions, culture of clashes and virtual problems in old Turkey.
Though the presidential post is ceremonial, the Islamist strongman has vowed to continue ruling from the presidential palace. When the outgoing president Abdullah Gül hands over the post of the head of state to him on August 28, his first job is to appoint a new prime minister to lead the next government. It is unclear how he plans to do that, but analysts believe he has enough clout to maintain his grip on power.
Based on Turkey's constitution, the president should not be affiliated to any political party. Since Erdogan was elected president, his influential personality will allow him to shift the power to whatever position he holds. Thus, from now on, the head of the AKP or the next prime minister will not hold the strongest position in Turkey. Power will be in the hands of Erdogan no matter what office he holds.
Erdogan's victory was celebrated until dawn by AKP supporters. However, for many Turks who opposed the long-serving PM, resentment was a common sentiment.
It's not good that he was elected straight away. For the nation, for us, he could have at least been elected in the second or third round. The voting turnout was really low.
The election was historic. It is the first presidential vote directly by the people. And Erdogan won convincingly with 52%, proving that he is by far the most popular and powerful politician in Turkey. On the other hand, 48% of the people voted against Erdogan, proving yet again that the secular and Kurdish citizens fear that he will curtail their freedom, as he has so vehemently done over the past decade.
Kiev announced its preparations for the final push into the rebel stronghold of Donetsk after making significant gains in recent days across eastern Ukraine. But Kiev's brutal tactics have not only claimed thousands of innocent lives, but are now threatening to cause an environmental disaster in the east.
Ukrainian forces say they are close to taking the rebel-held city of Donetsk after shelling the region for days.
We also once again call on civilians to urgently leave those cities, if possible, because an operation will be held there to liberate those cities and kill the terrorists.
But the advance of Kiev's forces hasn't come without a hefty price.
As of 9 a.m. today, there were 568 Ukrainian troops killed and 2,120 injured.
The ongoing fighting threatens to lead to even more serious consequences. For the past 3 weeks, the Ukrainian army has been intensely shelling Gorlovka, located in Ukraine's Donetsk region, home to the nation's largest chemical plant, Styrol, which has sparked fears of a chemical disaster in the making.
Due to the irresponsible actions of the Ukrainian army, citizens of Ukraine, Russia and Belarus are exposed to a deadly threat from an ecological disaster on a daily basis, the size of which cannot be predicted.
According to Brikov, the minimum impact of the accident could be felt at least 300 kilometers away, and according to the plant's owners, the risks of an accident are being silenced by the Ukrainian media. Meanwhile, in Donetsk, one prisoner was killed and over 100 other inmates escaped after heavy shelling struck a high-security prison in a western district of the city. Sporadic shelling in the insurgent bastion was also reported overnight.
NATO's Secretary General claims that there is a high probability that Russia could intervene militarily in eastern Ukraine.
High probability. We see the Russians developing the narrative and the pretext for such an operation under the guise of a humanitarian operation, and we see a military build-up that could be used to conduct such illegal military operations in Ukraine.
The human rights group Amnesty International has singled out the US military justice system and urged swift reforms and accountability. The organization stated that the US military failed to investigate the unlawful killing of civilians in Afghanistan. Amnesty stated that at least 1,800 Afghan civilians have been killed by coalition troops between 2009 and 2013, but only 6 cases against US military personnel went to trial over that period.
In numerous cases, there is credible evidence of unlawful killing of civilians, and the US, in many cases, has failed to conduct prompt, thorough and impartial investigations. Reform of US laws and policies are urgently needed. A number of other countries have improved their systems of military justice, established external investigation mechanisms independently of the command system of control, and some have even mandated that war crimes and serious human rights violations carried out by military personnel are tried by civilian judges.
The tragedy is that it has not been accompanied by efforts to strengthen accountability, which is what our report focuses on. It focuses on Afghan victims who have been left in the dark, without information and without access to justice, and how the deeply flawed US military system is a fundamental part of the reason why this is happening.
The United States has announced its decision to monitor the South China Sea to see whether de-escalatory steps are being taken. In response, Beijing warned that Washington is further emboldening countries like the Philippines and Vietnam to take a hardline stance against China. Japanese residents surveyed the damage of their homes after Typhoon Halong struck western Japan over the weekend, killing 9 people and leaving 2 others missing. Halong is the 11th typhoon of the season in the western Pacific Basin. The Japanese Meteorological Agency on Monday downgraded the typhoon to a tropical depression as it continued to head north away from the Japanese islands and en route to Russia. Liberia's tough measures to contain the deadly Ebola outbreak are affecting both the economy and the daily lives of the country's villagers. Soldiers are enforcing quarantines in some regions of the country and within many villages, and towns' suspicion of fear and fears are growing.
It's market day in Johnny's Town. Traders normally gather here from across the local area. But with desperate times comes desperate measures. Village elders are driving people away. They don't want outsiders in their town.
We hear over the radio that there should be no public gathering. If you get 2 or 3 people together, maybe you do not know who may have encountered the virus. When you go around the person, maybe the same virus that person has, you will get the same thing.
To try and contain Ebola, the government wants people to stay put, especially in the worst affected areas like this one. Armed security at checkpoints is stopping travel between districts. The measures are too tough for some.
Life is getting very difficult. Now some of us need to move around, buy something to the market, ride motorbike and do other activities. Now the government is saying that everybody remain home. Everybody stayed to their various places. And now how do you go and make your life? And now we need to move around, make life and make money. And if you make money, you get something to buy and you eat. Now they are saying no market. Though it is very bad, very difficult.
Dofelsa Yahunijan is this area's district health officer. He manages a hotline for suspected Ebola cases. But the nearest treatment facility is a 2-hour drive away, and he's only got 1 ambulance at his disposal.
We have only 1 case management center, which is in Foya. We see calls from all sides. When I call Foya, they tell me they have no space today to receive any new calls. All day, I receive calls from the community who say we have new cases.
International donors have pledged millions in financial assistance. But in these rural communities, the benefit of that money is yet to be felt.
Here's a reminder of our top stories. Nouri al-Maliki rejects the appointment of Haider al-Abadi as Iraq's Prime Minister, calling the move unconstitutional. The plight of the Yazidi community worsens, with tens of thousands still besieged by Islamic State militants. And a cautious calm prevails in Gaza as the Israelis and Palestinians continue negotiating over a permanent ceasefire. Well, that's all from me and the Al Jazeera News team. Thank you very much for watching and good night.